The brain is one of the most complex parts of a human being. It is one of the least understood, yet most important contributors to what makes us, us. How is it that the brain lets us gather and interpret information from the world around us? How can we learn new things? What happens when we remember, forget? Why does the brain let us feel pain? And why is that the only sense we can't live without? How does the brain give us control over the movement of our body? Why do we experience emotions? And how does the brain make that possible? These questions have been asked for hundreds of years. Scientists who began exploring and studying the brain, along with the rest of the nervous system, became called neuroscientists. Neuroscience refers to the scientific study of the nervous system. In this video, we'll take a brief look at the origins of neuroscience, which can be traced back to about 7,000 years ago. We'll also take a look at what neuroscience looks like today, as well as the variety of ways you can be a neuroscientist. Surprisingly, some of them don't even require a background in biology. As you may know, the nervous system is made up of the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves that run throughout the body. These structures are vital to allowing us to navigate life. Turns out, archaeologists found that human ancestors realized their importance too. Hominid skulls have been found dating back to about 7,000 years ago, which have markings caused by holes being created in the skull. These holes healed over somewhat, indicating that the holes were created when the hominid was still alive, likely with the intent of curing an issue with the brain. Later, in ancient Greece, Hippocrates, known today as the father of Western medicine, realized that there was a correlation between an organ's structure and its function in the body. He figured that since the eyes, ears, nose, and tongue had connections to the brain must be important for sensation. He also thought that intelligence was centered in the brain, which was a controversial idea, considering how, at the time, the heart was thought to be the seat of consciousness. During the Roman Empire, Galen, a doctor and writer, noticed when dissecting the brain of a sheep that there were two major parts, the front part, called the cerebrum, and the back part, called the cerebellum. Like Hippocrates before him, Galen tried to figure out the roles of each of these parts from their structure. Since the cerebrum was squishy and the cerebellum was somewhat hard, Galen figured that the cerebellum controlled movement, and that memories were stored in the cerebrum, as its squishiness made it a good candidate to imprint things in, and guessed that memories would stick better that way. It turns out that Galen was mostly right, just for the wrong reasons. In his dissections, Galen found big hollow spaces in the brain called ventricles. At the time, the theory of how the body moved was that fluid would pump through the body, causing it to move in response. Similar to how the heart pumps blood throughout the body, Galen thought the brain stored fluid in the ventricles and pushed it to the rest of the body, allowing for sensation and the creation of movement. Galen's theory stood for over 1,000 years, until discoveries in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries proved it wrong. It was discovered that the brain was made of two different types of tissue, white matter and gray matter. Because of its structure, it was determined that white matter brought signals to and carried signals from gray matter. Scientists also realized that the nervous system had two main parts, a central division, which was made of the brain and spinal cord, and a side or peripheral division, consisting of nerves that spread throughout the body. They also found that the bumps and grooves on the brain, or gyri and sulci, had a similar pattern in all human brains. This let the cerebrum be split up into different regions, or lobes, which were thought to possibly be in charge of different functions. In the 19th century, scientists discovered that the muscles of the body would twitch when electricity was applied to the nerves, and that the brain was able to generate electricity. The new theory became that nerves acted like electrical wires to bring signals to and from the brain. These nerves were made of smaller units called nerve fibers, with some fibers handling information about sensation and others handling information allowing body movement. Interestingly, these different fibers attach to different parts of the spinal cord, but that's something for a future video. In 1861, Paul Broca, a French neurologist, had a patient who could understand language but couldn't speak. When the man died, Broca studied his brain and found damage in the left frontal lobe. From this case, and several others like it, Broca realized that this area of the brain was important for human speech. Later, experiments by other scientists found different parts of the brain to be specialized for different functions, such as the occipital lobe's importance for vision. Many neuroscientists study animal brains with the hopes of better understanding human brains. How is this possible? In 1859, Charles Darwin made his theory of evolution, suggesting that animals evolved from common ancestors over many generations. This idea extends to the nervous system of these species. Nervous systems of species that evolved from a common ancestor have common mechanisms, which allows neuroscientists to relate the results of animal experiments to humans. For example, much of how nerves send electrical information was first discovered in squid, but it turns out it works the same way in humans. Finally, advances in microscopes in the 1800s allowed scientists to better study brain cells. Were brain cells fused together like our blood vessels are? Or is the brain made up of individual units? That discovery will be discussed in a future video, but the answer is B. An individual nerve cell, or neuron, is the basic functional unit of the nervous system. Now that we've looked at some of the big steps made in the past in neuroscience, let's take a look at what neuroscience looks like today. Studying the brain is a huge task. There is still so much to explore, and the brain is incredibly complex. To make the process more manageable, neuroscientists break this challenge into smaller pieces and study different aspects of the brain. Here are the major levels of neuroscience, which I like to think of as representing a zoomed in or zoomed out look at the brain. Molecular neuroscience looks at how different molecules and compounds give rise to the way the brain works, or affect the brain when problems happen. Cellular neuroscience looks at how these molecules work together to give neurons their properties. They tackle questions like, how do neurons interact with each other? How are neurons different from each other, and what does that difference let them do? Systems neuroscience looks at how these neurons work together to make complex circuits to achieve a certain function. These functions could include vision, movement, and sensation, among many others. They tackle questions like, how does the brain integrate sensory information? And how does it use that information to make decisions and start movements? Behavioral neuroscience focuses on how these different neural systems work together to make complex behaviors. Looking at how neural systems interact to create the mood, dreams, or drug effects is done in behavioral neuroscience. Finally, cognitive neuroscience attempts to explore how everything from the levels before can create higher level abilities like self-awareness, imagination, and language. That's basically what makes neuroscience, but what makes a neuroscientist? Turns out there are three main types of neuroscientists: clinical neuroscientists, experimental neuroscientists, and theoretical neuroscientists. All of these neuroscientists follow the scientific process, which includes observation, experimental replication, interpretation, and verification. Here are some examples of clinical and experimental neuroscientists. Now, I will note that most of these require an MD or PhD degree, which is why my personal favorite is the third category: theoretical neuroscientists. Theoretical neuroscience is a very new field with people in it from backgrounds including physics, data science, math, philosophy, and computer science, just to name a few. Here, researchers use math, models, and computer tools to understand the brain at all the levels we mentioned before. They can analyze and interpret the large amounts of data generated by clinical and experimental neuroscientists to focus experiments and increase the pace of new discoveries. Neuroscience is a field that benefits greatly from diverse perspectives, ideas, and strategies, and there is so much left to explore that a groundbreaking discovery may be just around almost every corner of the brain. No matter what aspect of neuroscience interests you, and no matter what background you may have or want to develop, there's a place for you as a neuroscientist. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to this channel. I plan on making more videos explaining and exploring neuroscience concepts, so if you have a suggestion for a topic or a note on something I could improve for in the future video, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next video.